And in our final segment, we meet Nancy Ortberg, CEO of Transforming the Bay with Christ. TBC works to strategize, edify, and encourage ministry leaders so that they can unify, amplify, and multiply for the greatest impact. Here's my conversation with Nancy. This beautiful woman is Nancy Ortberg, CEO of Transforming the Bay with Christ, based in the San Francisco Bay region. She has, in addition, led a staff team in the recruitment and mobilization of thousands of volunteers, as well as spoken internationally and domestically on topics of leadership and the creation of a corporate culture. Nancy is passionate about improving personal and organizational effectiveness and believes that teams are the most dynamic way to produce those results. She believes in helping people bring the best of who they are to what they do best. Her particular interests are leading teams through the process of analyzing and planning the changes needed to improve how they work together as a team, starting with building trust with each other through getting exceptional results, which they can only achieve by being a dynamic leadership team. Tell me how you got here.
My husband and I spent 9 years on staff at a church back in the Midwest, and it was a wonderful experience, but I am a California native, and I was not happy with the snow. Exactly. And this opportunity up in Menlo Park for my husband opened up, and it had been something that we've been talking and praying about for a long time. And as best we could discern, felt like the door was open and we were ready. So we've been back in the Bay Area now for 14 and a half years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Transforming the Bay with Christ. You're the CEO. Was this your idea?
Oh, no. In fact, it existed about a year, maybe a year and a half before I came on. Mm-hmm. My husband was on the board, and it was started by 3 Christian businessmen and 4 senior pastors with the idea of wanting to help catalyze a holistic gospel movement in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. So we worked through 3 streams to do that, through Unify, Amplify, and Multiply. Unify is really focusing on what can we do together that we can't do alone, mm-hmm. and working especially with senior pastors and marketplace leaders of faith. Amplify is looking at what community pastors and nonprofit leaders are doing around education, homelessness, and housing, foster care, the causes that churches should be about. And then Multiply is looking at the ecosystem of the Bay Area for church planting and saying, what can we do to stimulate a rich environment where more church plants will take root?
What's been the biggest obstacle?
Ironically, unity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think building enough trust to get then people to believe, something is possible if even with 5% of our time, we come together and say, what can we do for city impact, for the gospel? Mm-hmm. I think unity is hard because it sounds better on paper than what people have actually seen happen as a result of unity. But I do think it's a power that we have not even tapped into yet. Mm-hmm. And eventually when the unity starts to snowball, it starts gaining momentum. But initially, anyway, I think the unity piece has been the most difficult.
What's been the most successful piece?
Getting a team put together to do this work. When you were reading my bio, which I hate sitting looking into a camera when somebody's reading my bio, yikes. But just the idea that, if Jesus needed a team and he called his team around him within the first 2 chapters of 2 of the Gospels, mm-hmm. and within the 4th chapter of the other 2, then we probably need a team. And what God unleashes with different gifts, that if we don't get tweaked by people's gifts, instead we get curious and excited, mm-hmm. I think amazing things can happen. So getting the team to work together, but also then the team of pastors networks, the team of marketplace leaders, the team of community pastors, church planters, nonprofit leaders, and helping them see themselves as a really integral part of this work.
What role does mentorship play in all of this?
We don't have anything formal in a formal mentor way, but this really is all about developing leaders. Mm-hmm. That's really the heart of this mission, is to look at the leaders that God has put into place and to pour relationship and resources and encouragement and challenge and vision into them to keep them in the game and to kind of accelerate them.
So then would you say that the TBC is kind of something that they can lean on for support, for ideas?
I think it's a catalyst. It kind of acts in that small space, pulling all that God's doing in the Bay Area together long enough to create a spark, a flame out of the sparks. I think one of my biggest surprises when I first started, because the Bay Area gets painted as such a spiritually resistant place, and I don't disagree with that.
Oh no, the statistics bear that out.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
But given that, when we're in our cars most of the days driving all around the Bay Area, I'm actually quite encouraged and surprised by what is happening in the kingdom all over the Bay Area.
What are you seeing?
Oh, groups of business leaders that on their own are pulling themselves together on a regular basis to ask the question, how does our faith intersect with our work? How do we make decisions and build teams and look at triple bottom lines, and how do we treat people and give people feedback? How do we shape culture?
Right.
And how do we see our work as a place of discipleship?
When you say triple bottom lines, what are you talking about?
So if you happen to be the CEO of an organization, how do you care about more than just profit, but also add to that agenda people and the planet? And how do you take a scope of your leadership, bird's eye view of my community that I work in the broader world? So it's not just about profits. And there's lots of organizations doing that nowadays.
Can you name a few?
Oh, sure. 5 Stars, one of them up in the Bay Area. I think Patagonia, from a position that wouldn't necessarily be a Christian organization. I think the whole conversation about triple bottom line in work is one that's been around for a few years and is gaining interest.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that corporations are starting to see that quality of life is important. So it's not just it's not just the fiscal bottom line, but it's, do they feel supported, etc. So or
even when you go into a Target and they say we give 10% of our money or 5% of our money back to the schools. No, they actually do that. And people will get cynical and say it's just a PR campaign. Actually, it's not.
Right.
They really do care about their community.
Right.
And I think for more Christians in positions of leadership to have that conversation is really important.
Condoleezza Rice gave a talk recently. Can you tell me a little bit about her and how she fits into this?
So she was gracious enough when we were having one of our large group gatherings over in the East Bay. We do a couple of those every year to just talk about the state of the Bay and what can happen when the kingdom really takes root in it. She agreed to be one of our speakers, and we had one of the highest turnouts we've had. Just because she's somebody that people want to hear from.
Right.
And what I loved about what she talked about was she was apolitical in the sense of, I don't think it would have mattered what party you were a part of, but her wisdom, her experience in building unity where there isn't unity, her challenge for the church in the Bay Area, and then she does it with such strength and grace. And grace,
yes.
Exactly. I mean, I knew she was going to be good. I had no idea.
How good?
No. And then when we walked off the stage, when she walked off the stage and I came up, she had tears in her eyes.
Oh.
And I think for her, she grew up with her father being a pastor. I think for her to have a gathering of church and faith leaders and business in the Bay Area that she was able to speak into was very meaningful for her.
Yes. Because again, you pegged that she has been able to make ways out of no way, and on an international level. So those applications we can use right here.
Oh, that's beautifully said. Yeah. Exactly right.
Okay. Yeah. What's happening with the overall church today here in America? I'm seeing 2 different churches, and I'm wondering how can we get back to unity, because I see one church that's 100% behind a president who is not behaving well, for lack of a better way to say it, and then another group of Christians who are just like, I didn't vote for that. And so how do we get back to that unity? The lessons you're learning, how can we apply that to the entire nation?
Well, first of all, I think you're asking a really important question. I wish I had an easy or great answer, but I'll tell you what I've learned in my 2.5 years, and it's only been 2.5 years, so there are people that would know way more than I do.
Sure.
But when I look at Scripture in Ephesians, where Paul prays for the unity of the church. Right before that passage in chapter 4, I believe, he talks about the different gifts of the Spirit. And part of the reason I believe that he does that is unity has to have diversity for it to be unity. So unity is hard work. When Jesus chose to use the word unity in his last public prayer in John 17, I used to be a nurse, and I think when people are close to death, you pay attention to what they're talking about. And for some reason, given that platform, Jesus chose to pray for unity, which again sounds like kind of a wimpy word, It's not.
But we are the United States of America.
Well, there you go. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. You're exactly right. And then in the first verse of chapter 18, the next chapter, all the events start happening that orchestrate Jesus towards the cross.
Yeah.
I have to believe that when the evil one heard that prayer, he just said, no, we're not doing unity. If we do unity, I will lose.
Right.
So we will get Jesus to the cross. And that same diversity was true when Jesus put his team together.
Right.
You know, I grew up on the flannel graph story that Jesus went off and prayed and then came back with 12 names. Well, I would challenge you to reread the Gospels, because what it more looks like is he just started walking down the road and seeing people and say, you, follow me, you, follow me, you. All right, I can do this with anybody, because that's the gospel.
Right.
I can do this with anybody. And so he put Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector on the same team. They could not have been more ideologically opposed. Politically and ideologically, they would have been 180 degrees apart. Now, you can take a couple issues that come top to mind right now of churches that believe this and don't believe that,
right,
and put those in the blank spaces. And Jesus said, the only thing you two boys have in common is me.
That's right.
And that's enough. Simon, you've joined me because you think I'm going to overthrow the Roman government. I'm not. Not the way you think.
Right.
And Matthew, you're a sellout to the Roman government and you're working for them. And when Jesus chose those two people to be on his team, he was telling us something really important, that in order to have this kind of unity, there has to be diversity. James and John, they're called sons of thunder. In the Greek, it actually means sons of anger.
Wow.
So he put two people with anger management issues on his team. And then, of course, their mother was getting in the mess all the time, trying to jockey for position. That's right. Pick them. And then Peter, who just made, I mean, he was embarrassing. Mistake after mistake. You'd just be cringing like, oh, it's Peter.
Yeah.
And then don't even get me started with Judas. Like, he put together a team that was not the cream of the crop and was very diverse. And then his last prayer for them is, Father, would you unite them?
Yeah.
So I believe there is a power in unity that causes us to put our litmus paper down. And you and I might have very different, actually we may have very similar political ideologies, but if we had very different ideologies, that's interesting.
But we're still united at the foot of the cross.
Exactly. Great point to have a debate over and spar with each other, and at the end of the day say, we love each other and we're
exactly
together.
Right.
Yep.
And so actually that brings me to the next question, which was reconciliation. What kind of a heart is it going to take for us to reconcile? Well,
that's the complexity and the obstacles to unity, isn't it? That I want to hold on so tightly to the things that I believe in that go beyond who Jesus was, that I want to die on that hill, and I do it at the expense of your humanity.
Right.
And I think that's where the humility comes in, to say, I'm going to get to heaven and be wrong about a lot of things. I think as long as I'm right about Jesus, I'm good. So the humility to say, we don't see eye to eye on this, but you are my sister in Christ, you are my brother in Christ, and that's what trumps everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then my last little question is, I have friends who are Presbyterian, and I have one in particular who had, so I move in the charismas.
Okay.
And so I believe in the healing prayer, and I've experienced healing myself. So a friend of mine had a bum leg, and I said, hey, let me pray for you. He's like, no. I'm like, really? Okay. And he's Presbyterian, and he's like, no. You know, I'm like, but, and then when I say that I pray in tongues, he's like, oh.
Yeah.
Why is it that people are so resistant to those gifts that God is handing out freely?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I do think they have been misused a lot. I think that's fair. I think sometimes when we don't have an experience, we are postured to be a little skeptical of somebody else's experience, instead of to say, well, it's not illegal or immoral, so at least I should consider the possibility that they just have simply had a different experience.
Right.
And beyond that, maybe some old dispensational theology that thinks certain parts of the Bible were for certain times, which has never really made a lot of sense to me.
Right.
But it's just one more example of ways that we can pull apart instead of ways that we can come together.
Because one of my experiences before I began to receive the gifts, I was just like praying and what? Healing what? And I think I was more afraid than and I didn't have enough information. And so I feel like, okay, so people are afraid of this, but doesn't it say in Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom? And so I'm stepping off my soapbox now.
Those are two different kinds of fears.
Yeah.
But I do think that, for a lot of people, what I find true though is really if I'm assessing this correctly, there's way more in the Bible about suffering and what it means to live with God in suffering. And I think sometimes people can misuse those kind of gifts that you referred to as a way to circumvent that in a quick way that gives them relief. And then I think it can be hard for some people who said, well, gosh, I got prayed for and I never got healed, but she did. And it's just hard. I don't know what the answer is. I certainly know if I had a bum leg and you asked me to pray for it, I hope I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'd like to talk to your husband about this, but I'd like to get your perspective. I have a bunch of friends who go to Menlo Church in Mountain View, and we were in BSF at the same time as you had the vote to separate from PCUSA. Tell me a little bit about that process.
I think more than anything, it had become an impediment to future leadership that was proving to be difficult. It got portrayed as about a completely different issue in the press,
right?
Which it simply was never about,
right?
So that
for me, it was about holiness. I felt like the church was trying to stand for holiness.
I think it was much simpler than that, and that, you know, even for the church in Mountain View, our biggest obstacle for the first year of planting that church down there was our own denomination. They told us we couldn't do it. Anyway, I'll let John speak to that.
I will let John. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there anything else about TBC and the Bay Area that I may not have asked or covered that you'd like to cover?
Well, I think part of what we're also getting excited about is church multiplication. I've read in a couple different places that for the majority of people that do come to faith after age 18, it usually boils down to one of two circumstances. They hit a crisis in their life and they happen to have a Christian friend, or there's a new church plant in their neighborhood. And when I think about the Bay Area and how unchurched it is and how spiritually resistant it is, and whatever words you would choose, I think one of our best hopes is smaller churches planted in multiple places that can connect with the community.
Yes.
And I think a lot of our neighbors who might not say yes if you or I invited them to church as a first step might have pause to consider who God or Jesus might be if they see us out in the community serving with the marginalized and the poor and being really great neighbors.
And then also inviting them into your home.
Well, there's a good neighbor, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly right. Hospitality. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about the things that we might be able to do to stimulate that. One of the things that's come across our plate is we have a couple of donors that want to donate $1 million a year for the next 5 years to be matched so that we can start adding 15 to 20% to church planting budgets to help them overcome the great cost of living here and get some really great leaders who love the Bay Area and want to serve here and start more churches.
Okay.
Yeah.
One last question. What role do you see technology playing in all of this?
You're asking me. That's hilarious. I'm not a technology girl. Yeah. The chairman of our board, who really kind of had the brainchild for TBC, Pat Gelsinger, is the CEO of a large software company, and so he's always thinking in those terms. I think technology is a fantastic tool, and how do we leverage it in the role of a tool to help us make kingdom decisions that will impact people?
That's right.
Is a fabulous use of technology.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it was wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. I can't wait to meet you again.
You're so kind.
All right.
Please pray for TBC.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
for the Bay Area.
All right.
Thank you.